Center. I'm one of the program coordinators, and today we have the Career Services Center to talk about engineering interviewing tips 101. So you're going to hear from some amazing panelists, and Brianne will talk a little bit more about them. This presentation will be recorded, so will be available online, but throughout the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A to have your questions answered. And then Brianna, I'll go ahead and kick it on over to you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Alejandra. Today, thank you all for joining in. I know it's a busy time for you. It's a different time for you. So I appreciate you tuning in and hearing from us here. We've got a great panel for you. Today, we are talking about engineering interview tips. And as you all know, interviewing has kind of changed slightly. Some of you may be used to doing virtual interviews. But the name of the game has changed a little bit, where things are moving a lot more to the virtual experience. So today we're going to share with you just general interviewing tips, because I think those are just long lasting and don't really change too much between in-person and virtual. But we will sprinkle in a little bit of some virtual tips along the way. And to help me do that, I have joining us today Brittany Screws, who is the University Relations Liaison at Visa. Brittany's given a nice wave. And then we also have Karen Robinson, a ME alumna, woo, go Tritons, and Director of Engineering at HME. And a big thanks to TechSD for helping us get Karen. TechSD, by the way, is an awesome community organization that you all can tap into. They have a wide range of resources that are available to you, including a job board and just access to podcasts and virtual events that go on. So I highly encourage you all to look them up and join in on stuff that they have. And then lastly, my name is Brianne Wada. I'm one of the Associate Directors of the Tech and Engineering at the Career Center. So really want to get started today by giving you an overview of what we're going to cover. So the next couple of minutes are really going to showcase a little bit of what you're going to expect in the interview. That includes like stages of the interview, how you're going to prepare, and then how you can wrap up and follow up. So this is just a great way for you all to get some of your questions answered. I do have some questions already prepared as we move through the PowerPoint, but don't be shy. Please feel free to chime in on the Q&A section, because we want to make sure that this is relevant to your needs as well. And so type in any questions that come up along the way, and I'll squeeze them into the panelists as we go through the PowerPoint. All right, sound good? Awesome. Okay, so let's get started here. What can you expect on the interview? Okay, so there's certain stages that typically will take place in the interview, and I've kind of outlined them here, and some of you may already be familiar with it, and some of you may be close to entering these spots, or maybe even close to entering them as we approach the fall. But typically, the interview will go in from a phone screen, and then it'll move into an in-person, or at this point, right, a virtual interview. And then you'll move into a technical interview is typically the cadence that I see. But I'd like to actually open this up right now to Brittany and or Karen in no particular order. If you both can kind of share, what does the typical interview process look like at your organization, and what are those stages that students can expect to take as they move through? So Brittany?
I can start. Hopefully you all can hear me well. So again, as Brianne said, I am Brittany. I am one of the university liaisons at Visa. And so specifically with our process, it's two-part depending on what type of position or program that you are applying to. So for example, if you are seeking an internship with us, our entire internship process has two stages. The first stage will be typically an on-campus interview. Obviously, if we can't get on campus, it'll be a virtual call or video. That is usually usually a mix between behavioral and technical questions. And then the second round will be more than likely more more technical. So that's where we'll dive a little bit deeper into your skills, depending on your specific program and interest. After the second round interviewing for the internship process, we usually will make a decision. Of course, if we have other factors that we need to chime into, then we'll go into that. Now, if you are looking to be a permanent employee, so say you're ready to graduate and you're looking for that full-time position, that process can be anywhere between 4 to 6 total interviews. And so the first 2 typically are going to be either on campus or virtual. And then the last part of that process can be a combination of an on-site visit, so you coming to our headquarters or whichever office you might be working at. It also could include a technical interview that might be a case challenge or a coding challenge or something to that effect. And then usually we wrap up with a final interview that you may connect directly with the hiring manager or a senior VP of the department that you'd be working on. So it's 2 parts depending on what program, but typically those fall in line with those.
Great, thank you, Brittany. And just to kind of clarify for the students in attendance, visas, interviews, and just recruitment in general is typically focused more on the software engineering side, correct?
Yes, for the most part, but we have a wide range of other types of specialties within the technical side. So if you're not so much on the software side, we have an increase in like our cyber security, design, etc. But majority of our roles are going to be in the software engineering.
Okay, perfect, great. Thank you. And Karen, do you have anything to add to that? I know you're more on the mechanical engineering side, so would be great to hear perspective there.
Sure. I actually have mechanical and electrical engineers on my team. But in general, whether it's an internship or a permanent position, our hiring process is fairly similar, at least on the technical side. So we do normally obviously we review resumes. First step is a phone screen. Because things are virtual, the next interview would be a little more in-depth interview with the HR department. We do some tests up front through the HR department. And then after you've made it through those screens, you come into engineering. And normally I'll do the first round of interviewing, and then I'll have 2 of my engineers representing their department speak to you. Because they're team members, so it's always nice to meet team members. And then our testing for technical interviews is a lot of problem solving or very basic mechanical engineering questions, mostly geared toward what our positions require, right? So what we would want to take a look at, the skill set that we're hoping you have or have interest in.
Great, thank you both so much. As you all can see, companies, it varies, right? What kind of interview that they are going to move you through. But I think this kind of framework, the screen that we're looking at right now, is a general base and hopes to help you kind of at least get mentally prepared for what the process is going to look like. And in each of the sections, you'll see some of the pieces that might come out in that process, right? I think in all across the board, it's going to be assessing your knowledge, skills, and abilities, but especially in that first phone screen or just first meeting that you have with the employer, you're going to really want to be able to tell them about yourself and focus in on that knowledge, skills, and abilities, and then move on through to kind of sharing more of your technical expertise as you go through. So thank you both for sharing that. I don't see any Q&A from the students yet, so we're going to keep moving through. And just a reminder, students, feel free to chime in with any questions in the Q&A as we move through. So how do you prepare, right, for this lovely interview that's about to take place? There are a variety of ways to do that. And so I'm actually going to toss this out to the panelists as we begin. Students, I hope you can kind of read the screen as we go through. But Karen or Brittany, can you share, or the both of you, can you share how can someone best prepare for an interview that's specifically for recruitment of engineering students?
Well, one thing I would say, and I think you have a lot of coverage in your slide here for sure, and I do like when people dress professionally. It doesn't have to be a suit, but to me that means you care about the interview. Certainly being yourself, so smiling and being very approachable, because it will make you more relaxed and probably be more successful. But I do think the thing that I think is also important is making sure you understand about the company you're interviewing for. That's very, very key, because a lot of the questions we're going to ask are related to what we do and what we need. So although the job description will give you a list of all the items, you know, sort of at a high level that you might be working on, understanding, you know, what is our market? Who are our customers? It'll help you come up with questions or things that might actually make you more interested to understand what are our products used in? You know, do I care about this? All these things really show, and it actually is very important in making you stand out.
And I can tag into that. So in addition to being prepared by doing your research with the company, I would also say be authentic and really consider your why. You know, why is it that you feel this position would be a good fit for you? Why is it that this company would be a good fit for you? So that does require the time up front to research, to ask yourself those questions, because one of the key points about winning in an interview and ultimately getting that job is you want to correlate the information that you know about that organization and all the information that you learned that's listed on that job description, and you want to tie that into you. You know, why would you be a great fit? And this is what's going to make you stand out from the other candidates. So I highly recommend that in addition to your research and just the tangible things that you can do, just be prepared to explain your why. Because the last thing you want is to show up for an interview, know all about the company, but then you can't explain to them why it would be a great fit. So you have to make sure that you're just being authentic as it relates to, you know, what you're pursuing and what you're looking for.
I love both of your feedback. I think that's awesome, right? Like really what we're looking for is to really connect with people and realize that they want to work for you, right? They want, or whichever organization they're going for, and that there's passion behind it, and not only on their own interests, but also what can they bring to the organization. And I think that's something that I also see a lot with students when we're coaching together, is really framing the answers to not what the company can do for you, right? But what can you do for the company? And that's kind of going back to this slide here in terms of what to bring, right? Knowledge of your own, what your knowledge, skills, and abilities are, and how that's going to contribute to the organization. So I think that speaks to that self-awareness piece that Brittany was alluding to, right? And that authenticity piece. Be authentic in it as well. Don't just try to make something up, because the recruiters are also going to be able to smell that out if you're just kind of making it up so that you move on to the next level. And then I think just the smile piece, right? Use that charm, bring yourself to it. When you smile, other people smile. There's a little mirror complex in our brain. It's kind of very similar to when other people yawn, you yawn. It's that same spot in the brain. And when you smile, other people smile. So bring your whole self to that when you're interviewing. And I just want to make sure to briefly read some of this on the slides so that folks, in case there's any issues with kind of reading the screen, I want to be able to share what we have on here as well. We say dress professionally, right? So for engineering, typically you're going to see this could mean business casual, but as Karen mentioned, you know, she likes it when people dress up a little bit, right? Shows people that you care. And so, you know, you could come in a suit. I do know that there are certain organizations, particularly that do a lot of consulting work in engineering, where they will actually expect you to dress up in a suit coming to the interview, because, you know, you're going to have to go see different folks that you're working with and different clients. But typically I would say, from what I've seen, it's a business casual affair. So, you know, a collared shirt, nice slacks. So I know a lot of times in the tech space, you see a lot of jeans and, you know, a blazer on top of a polo or something like that. So just know your audience. I think it goes back to what the panelists were sharing too, is know the company, kind of know the culture before you're entering that. And a good way to do that is actually attending information sessions. So a lot of organizations will host information sessions with us, and they're going to share what their culture of the company is. And typically they're going to share with you a little bit of what you can expect on the interview, and they will let you know, you know, how you should come in prepared for that. Practice answering common interview questions. We're going to dive deeper into that in just a couple of minutes, but this is something really, really big, and a great way that you can stand out on your interview is just practicing some of these interview questions. Big Interview on Handshake is a very cool tool that you can use. It'll actually show you some questions, typical questions that are asked on an interview based on industry. And so you can select engineering and then really kind of build out different questions that you might be asked on the interview, and you can practice because it'll actually record you. And that's a really great feature, especially in the day and age we're in now, where everything is moving virtual. So you can check your lighting, right? Your hair and how the camera angles are looking. And you can also just hear the way that you speak. So it's a great way to do that. And you can share, you can actually record yourself, right? And then you can share that recording with career coaches, your mentors, faculty, anybody that you'd like to get feedback from. And then the last thing is test the technology, test your internet connection, the camera, make sure it's working. The panelists here, we were on a little bit earlier to kind of test things out. So just a little heads up as you kind of enter that new virtual space. So I'm going to move forward here and talk about common questions that we can ask, and then we're going to talk about some tips that'll help you along the technical interview, because I know that that's a space that we can really work on. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to open up the floor and ask Brittany and Karen to share some of their favorite questions that they like to ask on an interview, or maybe some of the favorite questions they received when they've been on interviews. And what I'm going to do is actually, type this in as they speak. And then after that, we'll move into some technical interview tips. So let's focus on that first part, on the first question first, or what are some of your favorite interview questions that you've been asked? And Karen and Brittany, I'll leave it to either one of you to get us started.
I can get us started. So one of my favorite questions to ask that I feel is pretty common is, tell me about your current project or current position, or even I like to ask students, especially students who don't necessarily have work experience, I'll even ask, tell me about your current program. And essentially what I'm trying to do is get them to tell me about the experiences that they have based on whichever type of role and positions that they currently have. But then also I'm getting an idea about how that could potentially correlate to my role, or even with some of the skills that are needed for their current program, how that can tie into what I'm needing. And then I can keep going. Another one would be, tell me about a time that you've demonstrated leadership skills. I feel like that's pretty common in most interviews.
I like to ask interviewees to describe their dream job. When I ask about the dream job, it tells me, number one, a lot about you, tells me, what you're passionate about. And it does, I certainly don't want to hear the answer that people think I want to hear, right? But I do want to hear what really makes this person tick. That's so important. It's part of knowing the person and part of knowing the fit, right? And sometimes that can sort of lead to my next question is sort of, how did you get to this in your career path? What was it that made you choose this as your career? Again, these are somewhat related, but it tells me why you're so interested in this position, and does the job that we have really, is this going to be the spark for you? Will you be also a great fit for the team?
And I have another one as well. So there's two actually. So another question that I love to actually ask students is, tell me about your strong suits. Now, I don't necessarily like the line that says, tell me about your strengths or tell me about your weaknesses, but I do like to say, what skills or strengths can you bring to this role? So I'm giving you an opportunity to tell me about what is going to set you apart from other candidates, but also what do you think are your strongest skill sets that would essentially make you successful in this position? And then another question that I found, it's not so much related to a technical per se, but I feel like it's one of those behavioral questions where you can get an idea just about the person and some of the experiences they had, especially within school. I like to ask students, what are you going to miss most about your school experience, right? Especially you think about a student is transitioning, they've been at their college for 4 years, they've had an opportunity to volunteer, be in several different projects, build friendships. And so based on that answer, now technically this isn't a common question, but I get insight just on how enthusiastic that person was about, their transition, their school. It can tell me about their past leadership experience, etc. So I think, what are you going to miss most about, your previous role or maybe your university, could really give me an insight about what I could potentially expect you to do as you transition to come work with my team.
Great, thank you both. I'm curious to hear if how do you handle conflict, or describe a time when you had conflict and how did you handle that situation? Is that something that is typically still asked in interviews, particularly engineering interviews? And if so, can you share a little bit more about that?
Definitely. I know one of the questions that I was going to say was, basically you've come across an obstacle, but a conflict is sort of the same thing, right? You either have an issue that you have to address with a technical aspect, or you might have a conflict with someone that you're working with, and how do you deal with it? And then what did you learn from that experience going forward, right? Everybody through their career will come across challenges, and how you address it, learn from it, move forward is so important.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there any other questions that you feel like you you may ask on the interview, or anything else before we move on to the next piece?
Another question that I would ask is for them to tell me about some of their roles and responsibilities within a specific project, or if they do have an internship or their job. You know, here I want to know what type of experience that they may very well have, if there's any leadership experience that they had. So the roles and responsibilities question is important. And even too, depending on the type of technical interview, I usually do also ask for them to tell me about the systems that they're familiar with. You know, what type of coding are you familiar with? What do you use? What have you used primarily? And just have them talk to me a little bit about that.
I think that's a, oh, go ahead, Karen.
I was just going to say on the technical side, I just thought I'd let the team know that we do have some basic engineering questions, and normally what I would do is I would gear those basically to the project that you've described on your resume. I might dig into that just to understand, you know, how did that go? And then we do a lot of problem solving, and it's basically, it's not going to be textbook. It's basically to see when you're given a problem, and it's not like know this formula, but if it has a small formula, you know, you say assume this, right? I mean, how do you go through those steps? To me, technically, what I want to see is someone not knowing anything about the problem, but they can tackle it. They can break it down step by step. So they're simple, but it shows their thought process and their ability to problem solve given something maybe they're not familiar with.
Awesome. And I thank you both, because I think this is a great transition into more of those technical interviewing tips. And what students can really expect on this. And this is an area that I think a lot of students are unsure about, right? And it can be a little bit of an intimidating time during a technical interview. So if you can further expand on what you both are sharing in terms of you know, what kind of questions might come up in the technical interview, and then also sharing what are some tips that will help the student be successful at the technical interview. I think, Karen, you were alluding to, you know, talk through your logic and explain some things, but if we can kind of expand on that, that would be great.
So if I were to ask a technical question, I would probably point to your project, and I might ask you specific questions about, you know, why did you choose this material? Or, you know, what made you want to design the robot arm portion of it? And what were the challenges and how did you solve it? But mostly I really do focus on problem solving, because to me, when you get out into the workforce, when you have an engineering degree, that's your toolkit. And so your toolkit is at your fingertips, but it's your problem solving that enables you to use your toolkit. So what I'm looking for is I might literally throw a, you know, it's more like a logic question where I'll say, you know, you need to create a rope. It goes around the, you know, it goes around the earth, and then product management changes their mind and now it needs to be a foot away. How much more rope do you need? So what I would want to see is someone say, she's looking for how much more rope. You know, I know what I'm looking for. You know, start putting pen to paper, explain your thought process. Honestly, at the end of the day, do I necessarily care that you got to the right answer, or do I see that you're going to dive in, you're going to explain it, you're going to be able to communicate, you're going to be able to think, you're going to make assumptions? I actually personally look for the thought process. To me, I'm seeing engineering at work.
And I can agree with that. You know, being able to clearly talk through your process is very important. So you want to make sure that don't be intimidated if you do have a question. Because I know with Visa, typically our second round interviews include you actually writing the coding out, or if there is a specific challenge that you have to do up front, you're going to be on a whiteboard. So there is a level of nerves that you might have to deal with. So don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. But as you are working through a project or a code, make sure that you're speaking and talking through it. One of the things that I feel technical interviews are really looking for is, number one, of course, we want to know that you have the basic coding skills, the basic technical skills, but also your ability to just think creatively, and also analyze. As you don't be afraid to speak out as you are thinking about a problem, because for me, as a person who is trying to decide if I'm going to bring this person to the next round, you being able to analyze and process it verbally lets me know that you could potentially lead a team if you ever got an opportunity to be promoted, or if I need a leader, etc. So I think all in all, you can never be too prepared for a technical interview, especially depending on like the specific case. But as long as you know the basics of your skill set, the basics of what the specific project is for that role. So on top of that, you just need to be able to think thoroughly and think through as you are working out those problems.
I love it. It's all about the logic. It's not about getting the right answer. I think too, at UCSD, I'm an alumna too. I think Karen, you can attest to this. We are high achievers. And Brittany, I know you've interacted with a lot of our students as well. So, it's kind of in our blood to want to try to get the right answer. But I think it's nice that you two hit home that, the interview process, especially the technical interview process, is not all about getting the quote unquote right answer. It's really about that logic. How do you think? How do you present yourself in this situation? How do you handle yourself, right, when you're under pressure? I think these are things that are going to play out when you get out into the workforce. And so this is kind of a test round for folks to kind of see just how you're going to behave, but also think through that problem that you're presented with, because the joys of engineering is you're a problem solver and you love to do that. And so let's see how you think, right? And there's no quote unquote right way to move through a lot of processes, as you all have seen through your classes and projects. So love that you all touched on that. I think on the flip side, as the interview is starting to round at the end of it, we have a question from the audience here. What are types of questions that you do not like to be asked on an interview at the end? When you say, do you have any questions for me? And folks listening, typically at the end of an interview, the interviewer will ask you, do you have any questions for me? So let's start off with questions that you do not like to receive. And then I'd like to end it with, what questions do you like to hear? So we'll start off with, again, what questions do you not like to hear at the end of the interview?
Well, if someone were to be asking me a question, I think one thing to keep in mind is there are questions for, the engineering hiring manager, and then there are appropriate questions for HR. And so what I would do is just be mindful of that. I won't be talking salary, things like that. There's a lot of fair questions, but that's one area where I just let HR sort of answer those types of questions. So that's it's not even a big deal. There's almost no questions that I can even think of that I've been asked where I've thought, whoa, don't ask me that. So that was the first one that came to my mind.
I'll even say, so a part of researching a company, you may find things that like some additional information that is relevant to understanding the company as a whole, but not necessarily appropriate for your actual interview. So thinking about, like, if you see social media posts, or if you see maybe the company's in the news, hopefully in the news for great things, right? And so when you are looking to be creative, because I know a lot of students want to stand out and be creative with their questions, be cautious of making sure that you don't bring up anything too controversial or something that's just not related to the need. So for example, right now we have, unfortunately, companies that are laying people off, during the COVID, or might having to make some major reductions. If you are interested in why the company has laid someone off, avoid asking that question directly. So don't say, I saw that you all laid off 1,500 people. Tell me why, or like, what's going on with the company? But on the flip side of that, you can say, could you tell me about your insight about the future of the company, or tell me about what you think the future of the company is going. And even something that you might see on social media that might be great, or hopefully not too controversial. But I guess all I'm trying to say is there's going to be information that you find about an organization offline that isn't always going to be relevant to your specific interview. So I think some of those questions could wait until after you got the job. You can talk a little bit more in depth.
I think that's really great advice. And a great point that you bring up, Brittany, is kind of reframing some of the questions to help them get to the answers that they seek, and kind of having more of a positive spin on approaching the situation, because yes, there are things that happen in the world, but it's, again, how are we going to approach these situations, right? And so you may have questions in your mind about certain things, but again, in the interview, you are representing yourself, your brand, and you just want to make sure that you're trying to put the most positive light on the situation while you are trying to get some intel and see if this is a good fit for you as well. So really appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's a great piece of advice as we move forward. On the flip side of that question, what are great questions to ask at the end of an interview?
Well, one of my favorite questions to receive, especially from students, is the question of, how do you all recognize those who have gone above and beyond? So Brianne, you just mentioned that UCSD students typically are high performers. And so we want those high performers to be attracted to our company and to, thrive once they come. And so I want to know that you are looking at the future. When you are successful, ask the question about, how do I know that I'm being recognized by my manager? Is there a process that you all have to recognize those who are doing really, really well? I typically like to talk about that so that people can get excited about what to foresee.
Thank you. And Karen?
I think when I think about people who ask questions that I like, they're typically centered around really wanting to know and understand the job, sort of beyond what it says on paper, beyond the actual job description. Things like, as a new engineer, what might my learning path be? Would I get a project immediately when I start? Do I work with other departments? Am I traveling? Things that sort of are insightful to this person already has an interest in the job, and they're really looking at you know, what would my culture and environment be like at this location? Because we here at HME, we do value the culture. And so someone really wanting to be part of that and understand that, to me, is shows like a real interest in the job, and it's sort of beyond the obvious.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. I think that's a great point too that you hit on, Karen, about, you know, trying to understand, trying to get to what the culture of the company is, but understanding, you know, what kind of projects are we going to work on? What does a typical day look like? Because that kind of goes back to where we started, right? Is knowing who you are, knowing your values, knowing what kind of culture that you would most excel in. And knowing your knowledge, skills, and abilities, so that you can assess, is this going to be a great fit for me on that end as well? So thank you both. This was really fruitful. I appreciate you all entertaining this little exercise here too. And I'm going to kind of move on from this piece, right, and working off of these common questions. I'd like to hear a little bit about how can a student effectively answer some of those questions. And I think both of you touched on this as we were going through talking about what the common questions are. But typically, you know, a good interview answer, or I should say an answer to an interview question, a good one, is going to have certain components to it, right? So can we dive in a little bit deeper there? And you know, I don't know if you both use this particular model called STAR, because I know that there's another one called PAR, but we really want to, we at the Career Center, we use STAR here, and we say situation, task, action, and result are really good components of how to answer an interview question. So if you can kind of share a little bit of your thoughts on that, if you have any additions to this piece, and then I'll move on to ask you a little bit more about how students can articulate their knowledge and skill sets in the interview. So do you have any additions to STAR, or are you, you know, just, you can say, yeah, thumbs up to it. Just curious on both of your feedback on that.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the STAR method. Here at Visa, we don't necessarily have a specific target as far as, you know, how the student answers, but I know utilizing the STAR method, you cannot go wrong. And one of the key points with STAR, I feel the best thing you can do is be as concise as possible, especially when you're describing the actual situation. You know, what was the specific task that you worked on? What was the situation that, you know, you can describe to us? And then as you move on to talking about the task itself, talk about the goal of the task, talk about some of your strategy that you utilized, and then, you know, what actions did you take to be successful? And then always try to remember that ultimately we want to know the end result, whether it was a successful end result or a not so successful end result. You know, don't be afraid to talk about your failures as well. You know, sometimes we do have those projects that we worked on that ultimately didn't pan out the way that we wanted to. But if you can remember just utilizing the STAR method, you can be very concise on explaining the process that got you there. And then if it was an end result that you weren't necessarily hoping for, you can then talk about the thought process or the planning that you spent time doing in order to improve it on the next time.
Yeah, I agree with Brittany. And this is fairly new to our company, although a lot of the questions that we ask are really already geared toward answering this way, because it is, number one, it creates a great framework for answering the question and making sure you're covering what's important. But it also tells a lot about you and how you tackle things, right? It just doesn't tell the situation and the result. and make sure it talks about the specific actions that you took to get to that result. And definitely this is a framework that we use both for questions and in looking for a good, concise answer that's telling us really what we need. So I totally give it a thumbs up.
Awesome, thank you. And a common question that I'll get, I would say primarily from underclassmen who may not have prior internship experience, is how can they talk about a situation, or how can they talk about an experience that they had if they don't have that prior internship experience? Could you share some knowledge on that piece?
I would recommend using your projects that you worked on at school with the team. And, really, and I mean, everybody should have that. So otherwise there was some other thing outside of school that you also felt highlighted your problem solving capability and things were going wrong and you stepped in and you took the lead. That is good too, by the way, but I think that's the key, is using something where it really highlights what you do as a leader and an engineer, and using those examples.
I definitely agree with that. And just a caveat to that question, because I get that a lot. I don't have specific experience. Be confident as you are answering those questions. Think about what you are knowledgeable with. And if you do get a question, especially a scenario question that you have no experience with, be honest. I would say professionally say, you know what, I don't have knowledge or I don't have experience in that scenario. However, I would be happy to share with you an example that might be a bit close to what you might be looking for. It's all in a matter of how you frame it. One of the things that I had to learn early on is not being afraid of what I didn't have, but being confident what I could offer. And so whether this is going to be your first internship or your first job, just like Karen said, you have experience with something. You led a project, you are a part of a volunteer organization, you were a part of, something that may not necessarily even be related to this specific job. So use what you have and be honest about what you don't necessarily have, but always offer up an alternative.
I really love that piece of advice. I think it's a great one to always keep in your back pocket, no matter where you are or what stage you are in your professional career. Along those notes, I'm curious to hear feedback too, as we tie back to the technical interview experience. If someone is asked a question that they're not really sure how to answer or how to find a solution in that technical interview, is it okay to say, I'm not sure, can I get back to you? Or how do you feel, what's a best practice, I guess, to answer that question if they don't know how exactly to go about solving it?
I certainly think it's definitely okay to not know answers. It's definitely okay to forget a formula, all these things. I would simply say, I actually don't remember that specific whatever, but what I would do in this case is I would look up the whatever, then I would do this, and I would still move forward with, this is how I would still solve the problem. I don't remember this specific detail, but I will get the answer, and this is how I will go find it.
Yes, Karen is absolutely right. Try to solve the problem as best as you can right then and there, even if it means your answer has to be hypothetical. So saying, if I were in this situation, this is exactly the process I would take. My personal advice, I would try to stay away from saying things like, hey, can I get back to you? While you could essentially provide some feedback or maybe the answer to a specific question during your thank you note. And of course, I know we'll talk about follow-up later, but try to avoid depending on providing answers after the interview. Do your best while you're physically there, because again, it is ultimately a competition. You know, you are interviewing against other students. Not everybody is going to have the answer, but do your absolute best in the moment. And then if you feel it is appropriate, then you can do a follow-up through email as you would see fit.
Awesome. Thank you. Really, really great insight and points here. I think, you know, students keeping this in mind as you're going, it's just how, again, right, the process, the thought process. How would you actually answer this question if you had those tools available? And I love the way that you both phrased ways to kind of answer that question if they weren't sure how, or if they forgot a certain piece, but talking about, okay, you know, I don't really remember this, but this is how I would move through the process, right? And move through the situation. So really enjoy that. And engineers in the house, I know you love processes, so just keep that in mind as you keep going. So I want to move through here. I know we have about 10 minutes left, and I do want to leave some time for some Q&A that came through with students. But just to kind of wrap up here, follow up and follow through. I think this is a really key piece for the end of the interview, and a great way to help you stand out in the process. So curious to hear a little bit from the panelists on some of these pieces that we recommend as you're moving through at the end of the interview, right? To kind of put a capstone on this and stand out strong. So I think couple of tips to keep in mind, some pro tips. Send a thank you note, right, to those that you've interviewed with. Each interview should get one, or interviewer should get one. Try your best. I know sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you can clump them, I think, in one email, but you know, I think having a personalized thank you note is always a great way to stand out. Maintain, this is a way to maintain your brand, right? Think about the end of this interview, or the whole interview process, is really a reflection of yourself. So that's why we have this image here where, you know, you have a kid kind of looking, seeing their own reflection. This is going to be you, right? You are showing them who you really are. So end strong, and then follow through with your follow-up. So I know Brittany mentioned that, you know, try not to say, can I get back to you with an answer? But if you do, you know, follow through with that, right? And make sure you round out with it and finish strong. So those are some pieces some high level pieces that we thought were helpful for you. But Brittany and Karen, I guess question for you here is, how can a candidate positively stand out and finish that interview strong, particularly on the following up and the follow through?
My biggest piece of advice is add a portion of like a high point of their interview in the follow-up. So if you felt that during the interview, the interviewer asked you a question and it just gave you a spark, and you two engaged in authentic dialogue in that moment, follow up with that. Tell them how great, how excited the conversation was. Reiterate maybe some of the thought processes that you explained, or if there was a specific strategy that you explained, or if there was if he or she made clear that there is a problem that he is strictly trying to solve and trying to find the best person, talk about that in the follow-up. Let them know that you are paying attention, that you were engaged, and just briefly try to wrap up by saying, you know, if I were a part of this team, you know, I would be excited to work on XYZ software because of this. So I think that is my biggest point of advice, is to include a high point of a question or part of the conversation within that follow-up.
I really think Brittany's response is spot on. Absolutely, you know, saying how much they enjoyed this or whatever it is specifically that stands out and shows that you really care about the job or interested in the job is really the key. And I think that is what truly will help you to stand out. And definitely this thank you note really does make a difference. Not everybody does it. And I can tell you, as someone who interviews a lot, that this does make a difference, and I highly recommend you do what Brittany says and you do the thank you note.
Do you all prefer a email thank you note or a handwritten note?
I think handwritten looks more impressive.
I'm actually flexible. Handwritten notes are great. It just, you know, like I don't have a preference one or the other. I just rather whatever is going to be the most thoughtful and meaningful.
One thing I should say though is email will get there quicker. The
Yes.
note will take a while. So I thought about it after I answered, and you might be better off with the email. It's still impactful.
Yeah, I think
You're on mute, Brian.
Oh no. Okay. Hi. Thank you. I think that's a great point. I think one great question to ask at the end of the interview is, what are the next steps from here? And then you can kind of determine when the hiring decision is going to be made, or at least when you might move on to the next level. And I think that would indicate, you know, oh, maybe I should send an email, thank you note, right, out so that it gets to that person quicker versus the handwritten note. But in this day and age, handwritten notes, you know, they'll stand out in the digital world. But you'll hear, right? It depends on preference. So as long as you send the thank you note, just do that. And I think that you'll be in good shape. I want to make sure that we leave time for some Q&A as well. I know we have about 2 minutes left, so I want to be respectful of people's time. But we did have one question come through in the chat, and that is, should students still apply to positions that they don't meet GPA requirements for? And if they do, you know, happen to get through the interview, how can they address that low GPA on an interview?
I think in general, we don't require a GPA here, but I think in general, you should apply for things, even if this is like a general rule, typically it'll talk about like, they're almost like desireds, and you may have a bunch of other things that the company is really looking for, so I wouldn't shortchange yourself in general. And I would simply be ready, you know, to explain if someone asks you, you know, why is your GPA X, right? I would simply explain, oh, you know, I was working, you know, I had more classes than whatever it is. I would simply be able to explain and be able to answer any questions they might have about it. But I would never shortchange yourself. I would certainly apply to anything you're interested in.
Sure, I agree with that as well. One thing you do just have to be considerate of is think of it as you are still competing. So while you might have a lower GPA than, say, their ideal preferred person, just be prepared. As Karen said, be prepared to explain it, but also be prepared that if it does come up that, you know, unfortunately, you know, we did have to pass because we did have a candidate who had a higher GPA, because unfortunately it will happen. Just always be respectful and always just ask, you know, about other opportunities in the future, however you can work it. But I would say definitely still apply, but just be considerate if you aren't chosen for whatever reason.
Great. Thank you both. We are at time, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time today and want to thank everyone for joining in. I thought this was a wonderful panel and awesome insight from the both of you, Brittany and Karen. So a big thank you to the both of you. Really, I could not have done this without you both. So, and the students, I think, learned a lot in this session. And what I actually want to do is take a little photo of us before we all go, because I want to make sure we capture this. And I'm going to go back to the beginning so we have our names and all that. But want to, again, thank you both for this awesome opportunity. And I think Alejandra wanted to end us out as well. So if we all want to just bear with me here while I have the camera and smile. Yay. Okay, we'll get this posted. But thank you all. And Alejandra, I will toss it back out to you.
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. As a reminder, this presentation will be posted on the YouTube Idea Center channel. So look forward to viewing everything you learned again in that YouTube video. Thank you again. Feel free to log off now. Bye.
Bye.
Oops.